Firstly, we will show you how the installer can navigate through the controller, and we'll highlight some of the key features in the controller. One can turn on the boiler by accessing the home screen and activating the regulator, or it can be activated through the user menu and also activate the regulator here. To access the user menu, select Menu, which brings up various icons, and the first icon we'll access is the information screen. This gives details of the status of the boiler and shows boiler output, combustion fan and exhaust fan output, and amount of fuel to be consumed until the next service. Continuing through the information screens, one can see boiler and exhaust temperature and buffer tank temperature. The next icon is boiler settings. In here we set boiler temperature by using the easy touch up and down buttons. The next icon is setting the fuel hopper refill level when the hopper has been refilled to the top with fuel. This icon is for lambda calibration, which is generally accessed by the service technician. Still within the boiler settings, we can decrease the boiler temperature for nighttime function. For example, decrease the temperature by 10 degrees and set this on particular days and for particular times as shown. Continuing the same theme, we can also set the boiler for summertime mode for hot water use only in summertime. For both domestic hot water and heating, one can select winter mode. By selecting auto mode, it allows the weather compensation function to be used in the boiler. By going back out to main menu and entering general settings, one can set time, date, screen, brightness and sound level and language. By going back out to main menu, one can then access the alarms menu. For example, here one can see that we had a power cut logged, the safety thermostat was activated, and again one can see we had a power outage. All these alarms can be notified to one's email address or phone and highlight time of occurrence of the alarm. For each of the icons, one can get further information by pressing the I on the bottom of the screen. Here we can enter the service menu and enter a password for installers only. In the service settings, we can set up the auger configuration by doing an auger efficiency test and set the auger time. We can enter the fuel weight, which will give us our auger efficiency. We can then enter the calorific value of the fuel. This is shown again in the commissioning firing section later in this video. Here one can adjust modulation or increase combustion fan speed or exhaust fan speed at full power. For example, if the boiler is installed in a challenging position and one needs to increase draft. Here we can set our desired oxygen level, and the boiler will always try to maintain this level via lambda control. Here we can set fans, oxygen, etc. at medium power, i.e. 50%. Again, one can set the fans, oxygen, etc. at low power, and the boiler automatically calculates fan speeds at all levels between full power and low power. Here one can set the minimum temperature that the user is allowed to set the boiler to, and also the maximum temperature. Here the installer can decide whether the boiler is worked off a time clock or some internal device. Again, in these boiler settings menu, we can set an external auger to fill the integral boiler hopper and the external auger runtime. By selecting the back arrow again all the while in boiler settings, one can adjust the factory settings for temperature that the pump is activated. Again, by selecting back arrow and selecting auxiliary, we can set an auxiliary output to activate a reserve boiler, or to create an external alarm or activate an additional pump. In manual control, we can test each component in the boiler. Here we activate the auger. Software updates are also made available. Here one can restore the boiler to factory settings, and this will undo any adjustments made. In the service settings, there is also a touchscreen calibration menu, and you'll need to press the random X's. This completes a walkthrough of all the settings within the controller that the installer may need to access. The next access level is the manufacturer's level, which is only accessible by representatives of the manufacturer, and this level contains parameters that seldom, if ever, need adjustment. For example, in burner settings, the factory settings of ignition time on, the auger preload time, and the igniter preheat time are all set and cannot be altered by the installer. the draft factory settings and the ignition fix time are set, for example. Also contained here are many of the safety settings surrounding cleaning and shutdown if no flame detection, or it can pause the auger to allow the flame to develop in the event of a slow start. All these are factory settings that can only be adjusted by the manufacturer, but are shown here to give you, the installer, a sense of the extensive logic that is contained within the E-Compact boiler. The installer can also create shortcuts to add certain menus to favourites. To do this, simply press the icon for 3 seconds and then menu is stored in the Favourites folder. In the main screen, it shows the boiler operating temperature and amount of fuel in the hopper. To adjust the boiler temperature, simply press the present temperature and then use up and down arrows as shown. By now the installer will have connected power to the boiler and have the unit plumbed. The pre-commissioning checklist will have been completed and the manufacturer will have reviewed the checklist before issuing the unlock code. Turn on power to the controller by red switch by the electrical panel on left hand side of boiler. The controller will be in the locked position and an alarm will appear. Press menu icon and enter settings. Then enter the unlocking pin provided by WES. Once in the boiler lock screen, set to no and click OK. Return to the home screen. The boiler is now unlocked. Enter manual mode by pressing the manual mode icon and run through a full outputs test to confirm all components are working OK by visual and audio check. Run auger outputs test. Then run combustion fan output test. Followed by exhaust fan output test. The boiler cleaning motor and de-ash motors outputs test is again carried out, and one can confirm these are operating by visually inspecting that they are rotating. Check the igniter by seeing if it heats up. Run pump outputs tests by checking that it rotates. Run a compressor and solenoid outputs test. Ensure you hear the solenoid click, indicating that it has released. Run the Belimo output on 28 kW boiler and observe the side plate opening and closing fully. Run the pump to make sure the system is fully de-aerated. Check system pressure on the info screen. Ideally, this should be at 1.5 bar. Check that the burner pod is seated correctly and the baffle is in position. Fill the hopper with fuel and set the fuel refill icon to 100%. Hold your finger on the value of the refill icon and the message reset fill level to 100% will appear. Click the check to confirm. Carry out an auger efficiency test. Enter the service menu. A pin for the service engineer is required for this menu. Again, ask the manufacturer for this. Enter boiler settings. Auger efficiency test. Press start and the auger will start to run for 6 minutes. Collect the fuel into a container for weighing. The test can be paused by pressing stop to empty the collecting container and restarted with start. At the end of the efficiency test, enter the fuel weight collected over 6 minutes. The auger is now calibrated. You can also put in the energy density or CV of fuel here if you want to deviate from factory settings. The E-Compact iGen controller using an advanced algorithm then calculates the fuel rates for each stage of the boiler operation from 100% down to 30% power. This algorithm is often referred to as PID or fuzzy logic. It simplifies the commissioning process greatly and reduces the amount of human intervention in setting up the boiler. Decide how the boiler is being externally controlled. The factory settings are that the boiler is controlled by a 230 volt external control supply from a time clock within the property via a relay. If the controlling signal is a non-voltage switching contact, then this can be connected directly to pins 42-43. Enter the user menu and turn on the controller. The controller is now on and is awaiting the signal from the time clock / room thermostat to start the ignition. Once the boiler has a call for heat, the ignition sequence starts with the following logic. Cleaning 20 seconds. Preheating 120 seconds. Preload 38 seconds. Fixed ignition 5 minutes. Variable ignition 4 minutes or 3 degrees Celsius rise in flue gas temperature. Stabilization 120 seconds. Run mode. The boiler operates on PID modulation, so will modulate freely between 30% and 100% of boiler output. Once it reaches the target temperature, it will continue to run at its lowest power for an extra 5 degrees Celsius temperature rise before going to the burning off extinguishing stage. Burning off lasts for a minimum of 7 minutes. Once burning off is finished, it enters final cleaning, which is compressor charging for 120 seconds and release of solenoid for 0.4 seconds. The boiler will remain in standby until the temperature drops by 10 degrees Celsius to restart the ignition sequence again. When the boiler has reached full power, one should use the flue gas analyzer by inserting the probe in the inspection point and take CO2 and O2 readings. Again, the lambda sensor greatly simplifies this process and helps the boiler achieve consistently good combustion. Once commissioning has been completed, the commissioning cert needs to be returned to the manufacturer so that the warranty is registered on its database. The commissioning engineer must also spend at least 20 minutes handing the boiler over to the client by going through the end user's operating and maintenance instructions. Some of this must be done while the boiler is cold and before the boiler is fired. For example, how to remove the ash pan, baffles and grate and how to put them back in again properly. The customer must sign the commissioning card confirming they have received and understood how to operate the appliance.